Judge Thomas Reed brought down his gavel with a sharp crack. The afternoon session was dragging on, and his patience had worn thin. He'd been on the bench for 20 years in this small-town courthouse, and days like this made him feel every minute of those years. "Next case," he called, barely looking up from his papers. Lucy Matthews stepped forward. She wore a neat gray suit that had seen better days but was carefully pressed. Her dark skin contrasted with the crisp white of her blouse as she stood tall before the judge. "Your Honor, I'm here about a parking ticket that was incorrectly issued," she began in a clear, measured voice. Judge Reed glanced up briefly. Another person trying to get out of a fine. He saw such cases 50 times a week. His eyes took in her appearance with a quick sweep, simple clothes, no fancy lawyer beside her. Just another person wasting court time. "The citation states you were parked in a loading zone on Pine Street," he said flatly. "Were you loading or unloading at the time?" Lucy opened a folder she carried. "I was volunteering at the Pine Street Legal Aid Clinic, Your Honor. The ticket was issued even though my car was in the designated volunteer parking area. I have documentation from the clinic director." "The fine is $200, Judge," Reed interrupted, already reaching for his gavel again. "Next time, park where signs clearly permit it." Lucy tried once more. "Sir, if I could just show you the letter from the clinic and the parking map that proves—" "Ms. Matthews." Judge Reed cut her off sharply. "The court has many cases to hear today. The fine stands. Pay at the clerk's office on your way out." As Lucy walked away, she felt the familiar weight of being dismissed without a fair hearing. Her shoulders stayed straight, and her expression remained calm, but inside, a small flame of anger burned. This wasn't the first time she'd been treated this way, and it likely wouldn't be the last. What Judge Reed didn't know, what he hadn't bothered to find out, was that Lucy Matthews wasn't just any citizen trying to contest a ticket. For 20 years, she had worked her way up from a struggling single mother putting herself through night school to become one of the most respected legal minds in the region. Outside the courthouse, Lucy paused on the stone steps. She took a deep breath of the crisp autumn air and watched fallen leaves dance across the pavement. She could pay the fine easily enough. That wasn't the point. What bothered her was how quickly the judge had dismissed her without even looking at her evidence. "Lucy, I thought that was you." She turned to see William Parker, an old friend and fellow lawyer, climbing the steps toward her. "Will," she smiled, some of the tension leaving her face. "Here for the Jenkins case?" "Just wrapped up," he said. "Say, are you going to the Bar Association dinner tomorrow night? I hear there's going to be a big announcement." Lucy's smile changed subtly. "Yes, I'll be there." "Rumor has it Judge Reed is up for the Distinguished Service Award," William continued. 20 years on the bench, quite the achievement." Lucy nodded but said nothing. "Well, I'd better run. Still have to prepare for tomorrow morning's hearing," William said. "See you at the dinner." As he hurried up the steps, Lucy watched him go. She glanced back at the courthouse with its grand columns and stone facade. The words, "Equal Justice Under Law," were carved above the entrance. Lucy Matthews tucked her folder into her bag and walked toward her car. Tomorrow night would be interesting. Very interesting indeed. Because what Judge Reed didn't know was that 3 weeks ago, Lucy had been appointed as the new head of the Bar Association, the youngest person and first black woman ever to hold the position. The dinner tomorrow would be her first official appearance in the role, and Judge Reed's nomination for the Distinguished Service Award would be one of the first matters under her review. Sometimes life offered unexpected chances to right small wrongs. Lucy wasn't vindictive by nature, but she did believe in accountability. She drove away from the courthouse. She wondered if Judge Reed would recognize her when they met again, this time on very different terms. The end. The Oak Ridge Hotel ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers and polished silverware. Men in black suits and women in elegant dresses moved through the room, their conversations creating a gentle hum of noise. Tonight was the annual Legal Excellence Dinner, the most important social event for lawyers and judges in the region. Judge Thomas Reed adjusted his bow tie in a mirror near the entrance. His gray hair was freshly cut, his suit expensive and well-fitted. Tonight could be the pinnacle of his career. The Distinguished Service Award was given to only the most respected members of the legal community. "Thomas, congratulations on your nomination," called James Wilson, another judge, as he approached with a glass of champagne. "Think you'll take home the trophy tonight?" "One can hope," Thomas replied with a modest smile that didn't match the confidence in his eyes. 20 years on the bench should count for something. Across the room, Lucy Matthews greeted guests with warm handshakes and genuine smiles. Her simple black dress was elegant, and a single strand of pearls adorned her neck. Several people approached to congratulate her, though Judge Reed was too far away to notice these interactions. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced a voice over the speakers, "please find your assigned tables for dinner." Thomas made his way to table 1, the most prominent position in the room. As a nominee, he had expected a good seat, but table 1 meant he was considered a top contender. His chest swelled with pride as he pulled out his chair. "Good evening," said a familiar voice to his right. Thomas turned and nearly dropped into his seat when he saw who would be sitting next to him for dinner. It was the woman from yesterday's court session, the one with the parking ticket. What was her name? Matthews. Lucy Matthews. "Ms. Matthews," he managed, surprise evident in his voice. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I imagine not," Lucy replied, pleasantly. "Most people are surprised when they meet me in different contexts." Thomas felt a flicker of unease. What was a woman contesting a parking ticket doing at the most prestigious legal dinner of the year? His eyes traveled to her name card and the blood drained from his face. "Lucy Matthews, President, Regional Bar Association," it read. Thomas swallowed hard. The woman he had dismissed so quickly in his courtroom was not only a lawyer but the newly appointed head of the very organization hosting tonight's award ceremony, and the one who would announce the winner. "Congratulations on your appointment," Thomas said, struggling to maintain his composure. "I wasn't aware when we met yesterday." "Few people are when they first encounter me," Lucy replied, her voice even. "It's interesting how differently people treat you when they know your position versus when they don't." The first course arrived, saving Thomas from having to respond. Throughout the meal, he watched as Lucy charmed everyone at the table with her intelligence and warm manner. She showed no obvious sign of holding a grudge about their courthouse encounter, but Thomas couldn't help feeling that his award chances had just plummeted. Between the main course and dessert, Lucy turned to him. "Judge Reed, perhaps we could speak privately after dinner? I have some matters I'd like to discuss." Thomas nodded, his appetite suddenly gone. "Of course." Later, they found a quiet corner away from the crowd. Thomas braced himself for what was coming. "Judge Reed," Lucy began, her tone professional but firm, "I want to be clear that I'm not here to embarrass you about yesterday." "I appreciate that," Thomas said, relief washing over him. "However," she continued, opening a slim folder she had retrieved from her bag, "I am concerned about patterns of justice in your courtroom." She handed him several pages of statistics. Thomas scanned them, his mouth going dry. The numbers showed that in his courtroom, fines for people of color were consistently 40% higher than those for white defendants with similar offenses. Dismissal of evidence happened 3 times more often when presented by minority defendants. I had no idea," he said quietly, genuinely shocked by what he was seeing. "Few of us recognize our own blind spots," Lucy said, her voice gentler now. "But as judges, our blind spots affect people's lives every day." Thomas looked up from the papers to meet her gaze. For the first time, he truly saw Lucy Matthews, not as a category or a case number, but as a person of substance and dignity. "What happens now?" he asked. Lucy studied him for a moment. "That depends on you, Judge Reed. The question isn't whether you've made mistakes, we all have. The question is, what will you do now that you know?" The end. Thomas Reed sat alone in his office on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the Legal Excellence dinner. The Distinguished Service Award now sat on the desk of Judge William Harris across town. Thomas hadn't won, but strangely, That no longer seemed to matter much. The folder Lucy Matthews had given him lay open on his desk. He had read the statistics, dozens of times checking and rechecking the numbers. At first, he had looked for errors, for some explanation that would absolve him of responsibility. But after 2 sleepless nights, he had faced the truth. The numbers didn't lie. For 20 years, he had prided himself on being fair and impartial. Yet the evidence showed otherwise. People of color received higher fines in his courtroom. He dismissed their evidence more often. He interrupted them more frequently. All patterns he had never noticed about himself. A knock at his door pulled him from his thoughts. "Come in," he called. His assistant, Mary, poked her head in. "Sir, Ms. Matthews is here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but—" "Send her in," Thomas said, quickly getting to his feet. Lucy Matthews entered, her expression curious, as she noticed all the papers spread across his desk. She wore a simple blue dress and carried her ever-present leather folder. "Judge Reed, thank you for seeing me without notice," she said. "Please sit down," Thomas replied, gesturing to the chair across from him. "And call me Thomas." Lucy sat, her eyes taking in the open files and highlighted reports. "You've been busy," she observed. Thomas ran a hand through his gray hair. "I've been examining my record," he admitted. "Going back through 5 years of cases, sorting them by race, gender, age, I've found patterns I never knew existed." He picked up a sheet of paper and handed it to her. "I've drafted a proposal. A training program for judges in our district to recognize and address unconscious bias. Would you be willing to look at it?" Lucy's eyebrows rose in surprise as she accepted the paper. She read carefully, her expression giving nothing away. Thomas waited, his heart pounding. He had spent 2 weeks working on the proposal. "This is thorough," she finally said, looking up. "You're suggesting mandatory training for all judges?" "Yes," Thomas nodded. "And regular reviews of sentencing patterns, complete transparency of court data, and—" He hesitated. "I'd like to start by having my own cases from the past year reviewed by an independent committee." Lucy set the paper down. "May I ask what prompted this? I gave you those statistics expecting resistance, not this." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "Do you remember your parking ticket case?" "Of course. I've replayed that hearing 100 times in my mind," he said. "I never even looked at your evidence. I just made assumptions about who you were, what you were worth, whether you deserved my time." He shook his head. "But it wasn't just you. I've done the same to countless people over 2 decades. Lucy studied him, her expression softening slightly. "Change is never easy, Thomas, especially when it means acknowledging our own flaws." "No," he agreed. "But necessary change can't wait for easy times." Lucy smiled then, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "The Bar Association has been wanting to launch a judicial bias initiative for years. We've lacked the right person to lead it, someone from within the judiciary itself." Thomas straightened in his chair. "Are you suggesting the most effective advocates for change are those who've experienced the need for it firsthand?" she said. "Your proposal needs work, but it's a strong foundation. If you're serious about this, I think we could partner on something meaningful." For the first time in weeks, Thomas felt a weight lift from his shoulders. "I am serious." Lucy stood and extended her hand. "Then I think we have work to do, Judge Reed." As they shook hands, something shifted between them. Not friendship exactly, but the beginning of respect. A bridge built on honesty and shared purpose. "There's a Bar Association committee meeting next Thursday," Lucy said. "Would you be willing to present your proposal?" "I would," Thomas replied, surprised by how much he meant it. After Lucy left, Thomas walked to his office window and looked out at the courthouse square. For 20 years he had walked up those steps believing he embodied justice. Now he understood that justice wasn't something you achieved once and possessed forever. It was something you had to work toward every day, with humility and open eyes. He turned back to his desk and began revising his proposal. There was much work to be done. The end 2 months later, Thomas Reed stood nervously outside the main courtroom. It was no longer his courtroom. He had taken a temporary leave from the bench to work full-time on the Judicial Fairness Initiative. Today he would face his colleagues for the first time since making that decision. "Ready?" asked Lucy Matthews, appearing beside him with a clipboard in hand. Thomas adjusted his tie. He wasn't wearing his judge's robes today, but a simple gray suit. Without the robes, he felt strangely exposed. "As ready as I'll ever be," he replied. They entered the courtroom together. Instead of the usual setup, the space had been rearranged, with chairs in a circle. 20 judges from across the district sat waiting, their faces showing various degrees of interest, skepticism, and in some cases, clear annoyance. "Thank you all for coming," Lucy began once they were seated. "As president of the Bar Association, I'm pleased to introduce the first session of our Judicial Bias Awareness Program." A few judges shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Judge William Harris, who had won the Distinguished Service Award, raised his hand. "With all due respect, Ms. Matthews, many of us have been on the bench for decades. We know how to be fair. Is this really necessary?" Before Lucy could answer, Thomas leaned forward. "If I may, Lucy." "I had the exact same thought, William. For 20 years, I believed I was completely fair to everyone in my courtroom." Thomas pulled out a folder, the same one Lucy had given him at the dinner. "Then I saw the data. In my courtroom, people of color received fines that were 40% higher than white defendants for the same offenses. Women presenting evidence were interrupted 3 times more often than men. Young people from poor neighborhoods received harsher sentences than those from wealthy areas." The room fell silent as Thomas passed out copies of the statistics. "I'm not here because I think I'm better than any of you," he continued. "I'm here because I was shocked to discover I wasn't the fair judge I thought I was. And if it could happen to me, it could happen to anyone." Judge Harris studied the papers with a frown. "These numbers, they're from your court?" "Yes," Thomas answered simply. 5 years of data." An older judge, Mary Thompson, spoke up. "Have you analyzed data from other courts?" "We have," Lucy replied, "with permission from 3 judges who volunteered their records. The patterns vary, but unconscious bias appears in every courtroom we've studied." The room broke into murmurs as judges leaned toward each other, discussing the findings. Thomas caught fragments of conversation, some defensive, some curious, some concerned. "What exactly are we supposed to do about this?" asked a young judge from the back row. "We don't set out to be unfair." "That's exactly the point," Thomas said. "None of us intends to be biased. It happens without our awareness. But once we know, we have a responsibility to address it." He explained the program they had developed: regular review of court data, peer observation sessions, and techniques for ensuring all defendants received equal treatment. "The first step is simple," Lucy added. "Awareness. Being willing to examine our own decisions and patterns." Judge Harris raised his hand again. "Thomas, I've known you for 15 years. You've always been, well, set in your ways. What changed?" "Why are you doing this?" Thomas glanced at Lucy before answering. 2 months ago, a woman came into my courtroom with a parking ticket. I didn't listen to her explanation. I didn't look at her evidence. I just saw what I expected to see and made my ruling." He paused, looking around the room at his colleagues. That woman turned out to be Lucy Matthews, the new head of the Bar Association. But here's the thing, it shouldn't have mattered who she was. Every person who enters our courtrooms deserves the same respect, the same fairness, the same justice. And I wasn't providing that. The room was quiet as his words sank in. "I don't expect to change everything overnight," Thomas continued. "But I do believe we can do better, all of us, and the people who come before us deserve nothing less." To his surprise, Judge Harris was the first to nod. "I'd like to volunteer my court records for the next analysis," he said quietly. One by one, other judges began to raise their hands, volunteering to participate. Not everyone. There were still skeptical faces, but enough to start. As the session continued, Thomas caught Lucy's eye across the circle. She gave him a small smile of encouragement. For the first time since this journey began, Thomas felt something new taking root alongside his regret. Hope. The end. 6 months after the first training session, the courthouse auditorium was filled to capacity. Judges, lawyers, court staff, and community members had gathered for what the local newspaper called a groundbreaking moment in judicial reform. Thomas Reed stood at the side of the stage watching as people found their seats. His hair had more gray in it now, and new lines marked his face, but his eyes were clearer than they had been in years. "Nervous?" asked Lucy Matthews, joining him in the wings. "A little," Thomas admitted. "I never imagined being on this side of things." Lucy smiled. "You've earned this moment." The past 6 months had been the hardest of Thomas's professional life. The Judicial Fairness Initiative had faced resistance, criticism, and at times outright hostility. Some judges had refused to participate. Others had participated only to prove the program wrong. There had been late nights, heated arguments, and moments when Thomas had wondered if change was truly possible. But there had also been breakthroughs. Data didn't lie, and when confronted with their own patterns, many judges had begun to shift their approaches. Court procedures had been adjusted. Rules about interrupting testimony had been strengthened. Anonymous feedback systems had been created for those appearing in court. The results were starting to show. In the 10 courts that had fully adopted the program, disparities in fines, sentences, and procedural decisions had dropped by 30%. "It's time," Lucy said, touching his arm lightly. She walked onto the stage to applause and stepped up to the microphone. "Thank you all for coming today," she began. 6 months ago, the Judicial Fairness Initiative was just an idea, born from a single moment of recognition. Today, it is changing how justice is delivered across our district. She spoke about the progress they had made and the challenges that remained. Then her voice softened. None of this would have been possible without someone willing to look honestly at his own record and commit to doing better. Not just personally, but systemically. Please welcome the director of the Judicial Fairness Initiative, former Judge Thomas Reed. The applause as Thomas walked on stage surprised him with its warmth. He had expected polite acknowledgement at best. Instead, he saw genuine appreciation on many faces. "Thank you," he said when the applause died down. 6 months ago, I stood before many of you and admitted that despite my best intentions, I had failed to deliver equal justice in my courtroom." He paused, looking out at the audience. That admission was just the beginning. The real work came after examining practices I had taken for granted, listening to perspectives I had never considered, and changing habits formed over 20 years on the bench. Thomas shared stories from the initiative, moments of resistance transformed into understanding, data that had revealed surprising patterns, and small changes that had made big differences. "This work is difficult," he acknowledged. "It requires us to question our own perceptions and admit our failures. But I have learned that such honesty doesn't diminish us as judges. It makes us better servants of justice." From the audience, a hand raised. It was Robert Jones, a young man from the Community Advisory Board that had been formed as part of the initiative. "Judge Reed," he said when Thomas nodded to him, "many of us were skeptical when this program started. We've seen reform efforts come and go. What makes you believe this one will last?" It was a fair question, and Thomas took a moment before answering. "What makes this different is that it isn't imposed from outside. It comes from within our own ranks, from judges choosing to hold themselves accountable." He smiled slightly. "And it helps that we have the data to back it up. Numbers don't have opinions or biases. They simply show us what is." After the formal presentation ended, people gathered in small groups, talking excitedly about next steps. Thomas found himself surrounded by young lawyers eager to discuss expanding the program. Across the room, he spotted Lucy speaking with Judge Harris, who had become one of the program's strongest supporters after initially resisting it. As the crowd thinned, an older woman approached Thomas. Her face seemed vaguely familiar. "Judge Reed," she said, extending her hand. "I was in your courtroom last year, a rental dispute." Thomas shook her hand, trying to recall the case. You ruled against me, she continued. I was upset at the time, but last week I had another case, this time with your new procedures in place. The difference was, she paused, searching for words, remarkable. I felt heard, even though I still didn't win. As she walked away, Thomas felt a profound sense of satisfaction. Not the pride he had once taken in his position or authority, but something deeper and more genuine. The knowledge that real change was happening. One courtroom, one case, one person at a time. Outside, the sun was setting on the courthouse steps. Lucy joined him as he prepared to leave. Ready for the next phase, she asked. Thomas nodded. There was still so much to do, but for the first time in his career, he truly understood what equal justice meant and how much work it took to achieve it.